I find it interesting that she didn't even want to try, Congresswoman Crockett, to ask any questions.
This was supposed to be routine. Just another hearing. Just another microphone. Then Pam Bondi leaned in and tried to shrink the room. She didn't shout. She didn't insult. She implied. And that's when Jasmine Crockett smiled. No panic. No papers. No defense. Because she wasn't about to dodge the attack. She was about to flip it. What happened next didn't just stun the room. It completely reversed the power dynamic. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It was supposed to be routine. That's how these moments always begin. Just another hearing. Just another microphone. Just another exchange meant to fill time, not make history. The room was stiff. Fluorescent lights. Rows of aides pretending not to listen while listening to everything. Cameras already rolling, but on autopilot. Because no one came in expecting fireworks. Then she leaned in. Pam Bondi didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. She'd been in rooms like this her entire career, courtrooms, press conferences, political brawls disguised as polite conversation. She knew the move. A small smile. Not friendly. Not cruel. Controlled. She paused just long enough for the silence to stretch. Long enough to pull attention toward her. And then she delivered it. Not an insult. At least, not on paper. It was phrased carefully. Wrapped in legal language. Buffered with plausible deniability. The kind of sentence that sounds harmless to casual listeners, but lands like a pin to the balloon of credibility. A question that wasn't really a question. A suggestion disguised as concern. The implication was clear. Are you really qualified to be here? Beat. The air changed. You could feel it. Because moments like this usually end one way. The target stiffens, shuffles papers, clears their throat. Maybe they backtrack. Maybe they over-explain. Maybe they soften their tone to survive the moment. That's how power asserts itself. Quietly. Not with shouting, but with expectation. Expectation that the other person will comply. The cameras. Lingered. Zoomed slightly. Waiting. Because this was the part where the script usually plays out. But then something happened. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. No sharp inhale. No defensive posture. She didn't reach for her notes. Didn't flip a page. Didn't buy time. No papers shuffled. No nervous laugh. She smiled. Not wide. Not sarcastic. A calm, knowing smile. The kind that doesn't ask permission. And that's when the tone shifted. Because Bondi wasn't dealing with a flustered freshman. Wasn't dealing with someone hoping to get through the day without rocking the boat. She was dealing with someone who had already mapped the room. Someone who recognized the trap instantly. And instead of stepping back, she stepped toward it. Pause. That smile wasn't accidental. It was a signal. Not just to Bondi, but to everyone watching. To the staffers, the press, the viewers who would later replay this clip frame by frame. It said, I see what you're doing. And more importantly, I'm not afraid of it. Crockett adjusted her posture slightly. Leaned forward just enough to signal engagement, but not submission. Her hands were still. Her face relaxed. She wasn't preparing to defend herself. She was preparing to respond on her own terms. Bondi noticed. You could see it in the micro-expression. The tightening around the eyes. The half-second recalculation. Because this wasn't how the exchange was supposed to go. The move had been designed to dominate quietly. To frame the conversation before it even began. But now the framing was slipping. Beat. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence. Not awkward silence. Heavy silence. The kind that hangs because everyone senses something coming. And just as Crockett opened her mouth to speak, Bondi realized something was off. Very off. This wasn't hesitation. This wasn't uncertainty. This was intention. Crockett wasn't about to dodge the implication. She wasn't about to clarify or soften or redirect. She wasn't going to play defense, because defense would legitimize the attack. And Crockett had no intention of legitimizing it. The room leaned in. Even the people pretending not to watch were watching now. Because there's a moment, a rare one, when power dynamics flip before a single word is spoken. And this was it. Bondi could feel it. The question she delivered, the one meant to shrink the room, had instead exposed something else. That Crockett was comfortable here. That she wasn't surprised. Wasn't rattled. Wasn't impressed. In that comfort. That confidence? It's dangerous to people who rely on intimidation. Pause. Crockett inhaled. Not sharply. Not nervously. Just enough. And in that breath was a promise. This wasn't going to be a dodge. It wasn't going to be a deflection. It was going to be a detonation. Because when someone steps toward the trap instead of away from it, they're not trying to escape. They're about to turn it around. And what Jasmine Crockett said next didn't just flip the power dynamic. It rewrote the entire exchange. One, Crockett didn't start loud. That was the first surprise. No raised voice. No sharp edge. She started slow, measured, deliberate, almost calm. Beat. That calm wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Because when someone expects resistance, calm feels unsettling. It disrupts rhythm. It forces attention. Crockett tilted her head slightly, looked directly at Bondi. And then she did something no one expected. She thanked her, not sarcastically, not with a smirk. Politely. The room froze for half a second. Because you don't thank someone who just tried to undermine you unless you're about to use their words as evidence. That's when seasoned listeners leaned in, because gratitude, in moments like this, isn't courtesy. It's a setup. Pause. Crockett began speaking again, but not to defend herself. She didn't say, "That's not what I meant." She didn't explain her credentials. She didn't ask for respect. Instead, she reframed the exchange, sentence by sentence, not emotionally, not rhetorically, legally, factually. She referenced records, not loosely, precisely. Past statements, public positions, documented actions. Each point delivered evenly, calmly, like a prosecutor laying foundation before the jury even realizes. A trial has begun, and that's when the room shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. Chairs adjusted. A few aides stopped typing. One staffer looked up from their screen and didn't look back down. Because something important had just happened. The question wasn't about Jasmine Crockett anymore. It was about Pam Bondi. That pivot? That's power. Crockett wasn't reacting to Bondi's implication. She was redirecting the spotlight. Bondi had come in expecting control, expecting the high ground. But Crockett quietly removed it. Beat. She connected Bondi's words to Bondi's record. Not aggressively. Not accusator. I lied. Just clearly. She didn't accuse Bondi of hypocrisy. She let the timeline do it. Dates, decisions, outcomes. Each one placed carefully, like stones across a river. And with every step, the implication grew louder. Bondi's pen slowed. Then stopped. Her smile to practice. One tightened, just enough to notice. Not enough for casual viewers. Enough for people who know how power looks when it slips. Pause. Crockett wasn't finished. She paused. Not to gather herself, to let the room catch up. Silence filled the space. And silence, in rooms like this, is never empty. It's pressure. Then came the line. Not shouted. Not dramatic. No emphasis. No flourish. Just devastating. A single sentence that tied Bondi's past decisions directly to the very issue she was now lecturing about. Not as an attack. As a fact. And you could feel it. That invisible moment when control changes hands. Not abruptly. Inevitably. The kind of shift you can't reverse once it happens. Bondi blinked once. Her jaw tightened. She adjusted her posture, not forward, not back, but rigid. Because now she wasn't guiding the conversation. She was inside it. She wasn't the interrogator anymore. She was the subject. Beat. This is the part viewers miss if they're only listening for volume. Because Crockett never raised hers. She didn't need to. She had done something far more effective. She made Bondi explain herself without asking a single direct question. Every sentence Crockett spoke narrowed the options. Deny the record, risk contradiction. Deflect. Confirm the point. Push back emotionally. Lose the authority she tried to establish. Bondi could feel the trap forming. Ironically, the same kind of trap she'd attempted minutes earlier. But this one was tighter. Cleaner. Built on facts instead of implication. And Crockett knew it. You could tell by her body language. Relaxed shoulders. Steady tone. She wasn't bracing for a counterattack. She was waiting. Pause. And that's when Crockett did something else unexpected. She stopped. Mid-momentum. Not because she ran out of material, but because she wanted Bondi to step into the space she created. That pause was an invitation. Or dare, depending on how you saw it. Bondi inhaled. She was now forced to respond not to an insult, but to a record. not to tone, but to substance. And this was unfamiliar ground, because dominance built on posture collapses when confronted with receipts. Crockett watched calmly. She wasn't smiling anymore. She didn't need to. The work was done. And just before Bondi could fully regain her footing, Crockett decided to go somewhere Bondi didn't expect, somewhere that would make this exchange impossible to forget. And that next move would turn a sharp rebuttal into a moment people would replay again and again. Crockett leaned forward, not aggressively, not abruptly, intentionally. Beat, it was subtle, but unmistakable. A shift in posture that said, now we're going somewhere. She didn't raise her voice, didn't sharpen her tone. She simply asked a question, a simple one, not loaded with adjectives, not framed as an accusation, just a question. But it wasn't meant to be answered quickly, because this wasn't a yes or no question. It wasn't even about the words themselves. It forced context, history, accountability. It forced Bondi to look backward at her own record instead of forward at Crockett. And for the first time, Pam Bondi hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable. But cameras don't miss fractions, especially not this one, because hesitation is loud when confidence is expected. Her eyes shifted not to Crockett, but slightly off center. Her lips parted, then closed. That pause? That was the moment, because the question implied something far bigger than disagreement. It suggested that Bondi's outrage wasn't rooted in principle, but in convenience. That her moral authority came with selective memory. That the standards she was invoking now weren't the ones she had applied then. Pause. Crockett didn't interrupt, didn't clarify, didn't rephrase. She didn't rush to fill the space. She let the silence sit. And silence, in a room like this, doesn't fade. It amplifies. It gives the audience time to think. Time to connect dots. Time to realize what the question really meant. That silence? It screamed. Bondi finally responded, but the rhythm was gone. The cadence she'd started with earlier, controlled, confident, had slipped. Her answers sounded practiced, not prepared for this moment, but rehearsed for a different one. Defensive. She spoke in generalities now. Broader language, safer phrasing, because specifics were dangerous. Every sentence felt like it was designed to close a door, not open clarity. And that's when it became obvious. The dominance was broken. Bondi was no longer steering. She was reacting. Beat. Crockett listened carefully. No head shaking, no visible disagreement. She let Bondi finish, and when she spoke again, it wasn't to attack. It was to conclude. This was the closer, and she knew it. Not an insult, not a jab, a mirror. She reflected Bondi's own language back at her, almost word for word. Same phrasing, same framing. But now placed against Bondi's own record. And suddenly, the contradiction stood exposed, not because Crockett accused her of it, but because Bondi's own words made it impossible to deny. That's the most devastating kind of rebuttal. The one where the opponent defeats themselves. Pause. The audience didn't gasp. There were no audible reactions, no murmurs, no laughter. They went quiet because everyone understood what had just happened. This wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a dismantling. Crockett didn't overpower Bondi. She outpositioned her. And that difference matters, because power that relies on posture collapses when faced with consistency. And Crockett had been consistent from the start. Her tone, her facts, her pacing. She never rushed, never chased approval. She let Bondi reveal the tension herself. Bondi shifted in her seat, adjusted her posture. That tight smile returned, but thinner now, less assured, because the room had changed. The audience wasn't asking whether Crockett belonged there anymore. They were asking whether Bondi's argument did. Beat. This is the moment. Clips are replayed, not because of volume, but because of restraint, because restraint signals confidence, and Crockett had just demonstrated it in real time. She leaned back slightly, not in retreat. In completion, the message was clear. I've said what needed to be said, and that's when Bondi realized something else. This exchange wasn't ending on her terms. Not unless she escalated. and escalation always comes with risk. Pause. Bondi wasn't finished. You could see. Her posture straightened again. Her expression reset. She was preparing to respond not just to Crockett, but to the moment itself, to reclaim authority, to reassert control. But now the stakes were different, because any response would be measured against the contradiction already exposed. Any misstep would confirm it, and whatever she said next, whether it landed or backfired, would be the part everyone remembered. Because Bondi's response wouldn't just answer Crockett, it would ignite the real controversy that followed. Bondi straightened her posture. Not casually, deliberately. This was the recovery phase, the moment when experienced operators attempt to regain control after a stumble. Her shoulders squared. Her chin lifted slightly, and she pushed back. She questioned Crockett's framing, challenged the premise, suggested politely that this was more performance than substance. No raised voice, no visible irritation. On paper, it sounded solid. Professional, measured, technically defensible, beat. But something was missing. Momentum. That invisible force that carries authority from one sentence to the next. Bondi was speaking, but the room wasn't moving with her anymore. And that's when the contrast became impossible to ignore. Jasmine Crockett didn't interrupt, didn't object, didn't react. She didn't nod in agreement or shake her head in dissent. She just listened, hands still, expression neutral. And in rooms like this, listening can be louder than arguing because it forces the speaker to carry their own weight. Bondi continued, clarified her intent, reasserted her position, explained why Crockett's interpretation was, in her view, flawed. But with every sentence, something subtle happened. Her words began to echo, not because they were wrong, but because they were unnecessary. They felt like justification, and justification is a signal. It tells the audience someone is defending territory they've already lost. Pause. The more Bondi spoke, the more she confirmed Crockett's point. This wasn't about facts versus facts. It was about posture versus substance. Viewers later would rewind this section. Again and again. Not because of a single explosive moment, but because of the shift in perception. This is where it locked in. Bondi looked defensive, not panicked, not flustered, but reactive. Crockett, by contrast, looked umbothered. Almost detached, not disengaged. Composed. And composure reads as confidence when pressure is high. Beat. Bondi finally wrapped her response. The room settled. That's when Crockett spoke again. Immediately, she waited just long enough for the silence to register, and when she did respond, she didn't escalate. No sharp edge, no counterattack. She concluded, calmly, cleanly, one sentence, not long, not complex, but decisive. She reframed the entire exchange not as disagreement, but as a choice between accountability and performance. Not who spoke better, but who answered for their record. And in that framing, everything snapped into focus. Pause. It was surgical. Because Crockett didn't accuse Bondi of performing. She didn't label her actions. She contrasted approaches, and that allowed the audience to reach the conclusion themselves. Which is always more powerful. Bondi nodded. But it wasn't agreement. It was containment. The kind of nod people give when they understand the moment has exceeded their control, when they realize the exchange will live beyond the room, beyond the transcript. Beyond intent. She knew the clip was already out there. Phones were recording. Staffers were sharing. Social feeds were primed. And no amount of explanation would outrun a clean, controlled contrast like that. Beat. The microphones were still on, but the moment was already leaving the room. Because what mattered now wasn't what was being said. It was what had been seen. Who stayed calm, who chased control, who needed the last word. And who didn't. Bondi adjusted her papers. Crockett leaned back. Neither spoke, but the story had already written itself. Pause. What viewers would later debate wasn't policy. It was posture. Was Bondi pushing back or scrambling? Was Crockett restrained or dominant? And that debate is exactly why this moment stuck. Because it didn't end with a bang. It ended with clarity. And clarity travels. But what truly turned this exchange into a viral moment didn't happen on the record. It happened after the microphones cut point four within hours. The clip spread, not slowly. Not organically. Explosively. Different captions. Different crops. Different angles. Same exchange. Same tension. Same debate. Was Pam Bondi caught off guard? Or did Jasmine Crockett expose something deeper than a single moment? Supporters called it a masterclass. They broke down the pacing, the pauses, the discipline. They pointed out the restraint, the refusal to escalate. The way Crockett never chased dominance, she let it come to her. Critics called it disrespect. They argued tone. They questioned decorum. They said Crockett crossed an invisible line. But here's the thing, everyone watched. Supporters, critics, people who didn't care about the issue at all. Because this wasn't about policy anymore. It was about power. Who controls the room? Who defines the narrative? Who gets to ask questions? And who is expected to answer them? And most importantly, who refuses to play the role assigned to them? That's why this clip traveled. Not because of what was said, but because of what was shown. Crockett didn't win by shouting. She didn't dominate the room through volume or aggression. She won by not flinching. By recognizing the moment. She was being sized up and declining to shrink. Bondi didn't lose because she spoke. She lost because she assumed the script wouldn't change. She assumed the setup would hold, that the implication would land, that the posture would work, that the room would follow the familiar rhythm. But Crockett disrupted that rhythm. Not with chaos. With clarity. Pause. This is what made the moment stick. There was no viral one-liner. No shouting match. No gavel slam. Just a steady unraveling of expectation. Crockett never tried to embarrass Bondi. She didn't need to. She allowed Bondi's own framing and her own record to do the work. And that's uncomfortable to watch because it forces viewers to confront something bigger than personality. It forces them to ask, what does authority actually look like? Is it volume? Experience? Reputation? Or is it composure under pressure? Bondi had authority in the traditional sense. Title, experience, confidence entering the room. Crockett demonstrated authority in a different way. By refusing to accept the premise. By choosing when to speak and when not to. By understanding that silence can be louder than rebuttal. This is why the clip didn't die after one news cycle. It didn't resolve cleanly. People replayed it because they were trying to interpret it, trying to decide what they'd just seen. Was Crockett being strategic or defiant? Was Bondi being challenged or undermined? Those questions don't have neat answers, and moments without neat answers tend to linger. They spark threads, reaction videos, side-by-side comparisons. They become reference points. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're revealing pause. What happened in that room wasn't a takedown. It was a recalibration. A reminder that power isn't fixed. It shifts when someone refuses to respond the way they're expected. 2. That calculated attacks only work when the other person accepts the rules. Crockett didn't. And that refusal is what made the moment resonate, because people watching, whether they realized it or not, recognize something familiar, that feeling of being underestimated, of being talked down to politely, of being expected to perform deference instead of substance. And they saw someone choose a different response. Not explosive, not submissive, controlled, final beat. And that's why this moment still matters. Not because of who won, but because it showed something rare on camera. What happens when a calculated attack meets someone who's already 3 moves ahead? Someone who understands that the most powerful response isn't louder. Words, it's refusing to play the role written for. And once that happens, the script never works the same way again. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to follow more moving stories like this and turn on notifications to stay up to date.